I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to defend his cause. Maintain the honors of his word, the glory of his cross.
Hello, I'm James Brown, and on behalf of the Eastern Church of Christ located in Toronto, Canada, I'd like to welcome you to today's edition of Walking Through the Bible, a podcast where we seek to study the Bible and the Bible alone. Please stick around afterwards for information on how you can contact us. But for now, please go to the book of Genesis, and we'll turn you over to Jeremy Disocam for our study of the day.
Thank you, James, and welcome to all of our viewers. This is the 143rd lesson in our study of Genesis. Yesterday we covered Genesis chapter 41, verses 46 to 57, discussing the birth of Joseph's two sons, as well as the 7 years of plenty and the beginning of the 7 years of famine. If you missed that episode and would like to watch it, you can find it and all of our other podcasts on our website at www.easternchurch.org. You can also find them on our YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/EastEndChurchOfChrist under the Walking Through the Bible Genesis playlist. Today we're going to begin with Genesis 42 verse 1 and read through verse 8. The text that you'll see on the screen is from the English Standard Version, but you're welcome to follow along with any version that you have. So let's now read Genesis 42 beginning at verse 1. When Jacob learned that there was grain for sale in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" And he said, "Behold, I have heard that there is grain for sale in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his brothers, for he feared that harm might happen to him. Thus the sons of Israel came to buy among the others who came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was governor over the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke roughly to them. "Where do you come from?" he said. They said, "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." And Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. In yesterday's episode, we saw that a 30-year-old Joseph was made prime minister, or as today's reading says, governor, over all of Egypt. He was tasked with collecting all the food from Egypt during the 7 years of plenty, so that the country could withstand and survive through the 7 years of famine. The 7 years of plenty occurred just as Joseph said, and the 7 years of famine began right on cue as well. That means that Joseph is 37 years old at the beginning of the famine, having been in Egypt now for 20 years. Seeing as how Genesis 45:6 tells us that the famine has already been in the land for 2 years, this chapter probably begins during the first year of the famine, perhaps towards the end of the first year of the famine. Jacob is in Canaan, a land that has been hit hard by this famine. They have no food, but have heard that there is food in Egypt. His sons hadn't taken the initiative to go down to Egypt on their own, so their father tells them basically, "What are you waiting for, dummies? Go down into Egypt and buy food so that we all don't starve to death." So 10 of the 11 brothers who lived with Jacob went down into Egypt. The text says, though, that Benjamin was left behind because Jacob feared that harm might come to him. Why would Jacob fear losing this son and not the others? Because he thought that Benjamin was the only remaining son of his favorite wife, Rachel. His favorite son, Joseph, he presumed, had been killed by wild animals some 21 years before, so he was going to ensure that nothing happened to Benjamin on what could prove to be a dangerous trip down to Egypt. Jacob doesn't have this same fear about his other 10 sons, which again shows us his attitude towards the children of Rachel versus the children of Leah, Bilhah, and Zilpah. How old would Benjamin be at this time? Assuming that Benjamin was born about a year before Joseph was sold into Egypt, Benjamin would be about 22 years old here. We might think that that is certainly old enough to be able to protect himself, but Jacob wasn't going to chance it. Benjamin would stay home. When the brothers arrive in Egypt, they are obviously directed to the person selling the food, namely Joseph. As soon as they see him, they bow themselves to the earth, a show of respect. Joseph immediately recognized his brothers, but they didn't recognize him. Why would this be? For one, Joseph is over 20 years older by now, and so his facial features would have likely changed. But perhaps there's another reason. They weren't expecting him to be governor. They probably thought he was dead, so they didn't recognize him. It happens to us too, for when we meet a person, We know, but in a context we weren't expecting, we sometimes fail to recognize them. Joseph doesn't reveal his knowledge to them, however, but treats them as strangers. He asks them where they are from, to which they reply, Canaan. We'll continue this story, the Lord willing, on Monday. With that, our time is up for today. Please join us, the Lord willing, tomorrow for the question and answer edition, as well as the weekly sermon edition of this podcast. This week's question is, does the Bible need to be modernized? Well, the sermon will be titled, Hatred Stirs Up Strife. We will continue our study of Genesis, the Lord willing, on Monday, beginning at Genesis 42, verse 9.
Thank you, Jeremy. And to our viewers, we also thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button below. Should you have any questions or comments, please leave them below or email them to answeringtheword@gmail.com. We'll try to respond to you as quickly as we can. We hope you'll join us, Lord willing, tomorrow for our weekly question and answer edition, as well as the weekly sermon edition of this podcast. Goodbye for now, and have a great day.
I'm not ashamed to own my Lord.